Dr. Ashok Malhotra. I'm the chair of Yoga and Meditation Society, which is supported by a grant from the Meta-Nexus Institute of Philadelphia and also SUNY at Oneonta. Today we have a wonderful guest, Dr. Ronnie LittleJohn, who is the chairman of the philosophy department and also director of Asian Studies. His specialization is Taoism, and we'll be exploring different aspects of Taoism. And I'm very happy that you're here with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And we also have Dr. Douglas Schrader, who is distinguished teaching professor at SUNY Oneonta. He's also the chairman of the philosophy department. Between three of us, we'll try to hopefully undo the mystery of Taoism. Before we actually get into the real mystery of Taoism, let's get into some of the basic concepts. Lots of people in the United States know just a little bit about Taoism. Some might have watched the TV series called Kung Fu, The Legend Continues. And in that TV series, a lot of wisdom from the Tao Te Ching is expressed by David Carradine. And people know about Taoism from that, if they have watched it, or they use words like go with the flow. And beyond that, I don't think most of the people know much about it. So today you're going to tell us something first about what is Taoism, and tell us something about the people who started Taoism and the books they wrote. And then we'll get into the next question of the contemplative practice in Taoism.
Thank you. You know, many people may be familiar with Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. This film, a very fine Chinese film, is quintessentially Taoist. It's really not Buddhist, but it's Taoist. And when you see the masters in this film, what you're watching are Taoshi. And these people originated, as far as we can document them, maybe the 5th century BCE. And the text I think that most people are familiar with are the Tao Te Ching, or the Tao Te Ching. You can find it on in bookstores in that way, and the Zhuangzi. Also, you would see it spelled Chuangzi. Also in the these are the two basic texts of Taoism, foundational texts. But Taoism is the indigenous philosophical, religious tradition of China. And it's older probably than Confucianism. And in terms of its influence on the Chinese mentality, it has certainly cast as long a shadow as Confucianism, especially if you're talking about the common people, popular practices, the Chinese calendar, Chinese medicine, traditional medicine is thoroughgoing Taoist in practice.
Well, I think the way people understand it here in the United States, and also if we talk to some of the Chinese scholars like you, they think that Taoism, to understand Taoism, is to understand Chinese character. And because Taoism is more like a philosophy of action, which caters to all the three aspects of a human being, to the physicality of a human being, to the heart, as well as to the mind. And the combination of these three builds what we call character. And so to understand Chinese character is to understand Taoism.
Yes, this is exactly correct, because in Taoism the quintessential idea is to transform, is to be one with the Tao, and in doing that to find a kind of transformation of oneself. And this includes the physicality, the actual transformation of one's physical nature and physical being, as well as what we would call spiritual, the spiritual being and the contemplative, the mental faculties. And these kinds of divisions are not made in Taoism. They're brought from the outside. We look at them and we impose these things down onto Taoism and grid it in this manner. But if you look at the Tao Te Ching or the Zhuangzi or other texts, for example, the oldest meditative text in Taoism is not the Tao Te Ching, but the Nei. It's a book called Nei, which just means the inner work.
Right.
And so it is a manual, actually a training manual for the inner work, which affects your body, your longevity, your health, and as it affects the basic principle inside of us, which is called qi.
Right. You mentioned inner work, and you spoke a moment ago of transformation. We often hear of alchemy with respect to Taoism.
Right.
But I know that one of the most important types of alchemy is inner alchemy. So could you talk a little more about what that inner transformation, that inner change of being is like that the Taoist seeks?
Yes, and I think I'm so glad you brought this up because in Taoism alchemy comes to our mind. I mean, the Taoists were the inventors of gunpowder. They experimented with potions to drink to make you immortal, to put you into ecstatic spiritual states, to transform you physically. This is external alchemy.
Right.
And internal alchemy. But instead of thinking of them as split, as different, we should think of these as on a continuum, because it's all related to qi, the spiritual life force that is inside of. So if you hear of Tai Chi, or Tai Chi, as we often say, or Qi Gong, or in the case of Gong Fu, you mentioned the Kung Fu program. Well, Qi Gong is the work, Gong, of Qi. And this is the internal work where one focuses on the manipulation of the qi, the spiritual force inside of oneself, and in so doing transforms oneself by being one with the Tao.
Yeah, so that actually really ties together very well with how the contemplative practice in Taoism helps us with development of this qi and development of this body, or development of kind of a whole person, the physical, the emotional, and the mental person.
Right, because there's a way in which, and contemplative I think is a very strategic word here, because there's a way in which our rational mind gets in the way of this process. And it's not, I think, that Taoists were fundamentally denied the value of reason, but I think that they thought it had a very limited force and a limited value. And contemplation, meditation, which was always a part of the repertoire of activities that a Taoist practitioner engaged in, contemplation, meditation, it was a practice of emptiness, of emptying yourself of rational thought, rational discrimination and discursion. Again, not because you wanted to deny it, but because those ways of analyzing and breaking up the world would get in the way of the harmony of
How did they actually do that? Since you mentioned, emptying that analytical mind of all its contents, its skills, how did they actually do it? That's where contemplative practice, actual way of doing it.
Well, actually, there's a training manual that's probably from around the 4th century BCE that was discovered at a place called Ma Wang Dui just only a couple of decades ago. And it has 40 physical descriptions of bodily postures, breathing techniques, and so forth that the Taoists were using, let us say, long before Taoism ever encountered Buddhism. In China. So we know the Taoists, what we call the Taoist masters, the Tao Shi, we know they were practicing these
Some form of meditation.
Some forms of meditation that involved particularly positioning the body in a certain way. So, you know, we think about many times people in America and the West will if they think about Chinese medicine or Taoism, they might
Right.
think about acupuncture. Well, acupuncture, all it's really about is it's about chi forces
Sure.
inside of the body. And so the way you position your body in contemplation and meditation is a way of routing chi. It's a way of manipulating chi so that one gets a kind of harmony and so that a sort of flow results.
Right.
And that's the body side
so
of this.
the practices that you mentioned earlier of Tai Chi or
Exactly.
Qigong or Gong Fu are ways of manipulating the body so as to unblock blockages in the Qi.
Absolutely. The way of getting chi for the
Sort of spiritual
Qigong
chiropractics.
exercise always begins with getting the
Yes.
flow of chi going and becoming aware of this flow. And so, yes, Qigong, or what we would call Gong Fu, these practices were actually themselves spiritual practices. They were not in the beginning martial arts practices.
Right.
And so this is why in China today, of course, if you go to the parks in China, in the mornings you will see many of the elderly, particularly doing Qigong or Tai Chi. And they do it very slowly and this sort of thing. Well, it is the case that in the beginning of this process, it's always done slowly, okay? And now, many practitioners who do this for their health benefits, that's where it stops.
Right.
But a Daosher can do this process very fast, very quickly. And of course, the more you speed this up, the more it can become a
Right.
physical defense mechanism, the more it can become a martial art.
Well, what this very naturally leads to is the concept of power. If we think of the Kung Fu series, or we think of Crouching Tiger or whatever, what we get is an image of an individual who is able to channel a tremendous amount of energy
Exactly.
through what looks to be very simplistic, low-impact types of movements and so on. So is it fair to say that what the Taoists are after in terms of their inner alchemy is to tap into this cosmic power, whether you call it the Tao or whatever, and to actually somehow instantiate within themselves that power, to have it reside within them?
Right, exactly. And this is called opening heaven's gate.
Okay, all right.
It's called
Heaven's
opening
Gate.
heaven's gate, Kai
Yeah.
Tian Min in Chinese.
Uh-huh.
And so it's the idea, that power is already in you. So it's not as though you have to bring it
Right.
in.
Right.
But what you have to do is energize yourself with it. And the demarcations between ourselves, our body forms, and that chi that is in this room, those kinds of membranes are porous. And they're really non-existent, or they're existent. We see them as existent.
Right.
We see them visually in our visual frames, but really they are not there. And so, yes, so when you read the stories of Taoist immortals,
Right.
what are
Yes.
called Taoist immortals,
Yeah.
and you see all these legends and accounts, or you look at Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon,
Yeah.
or and you watch the master there at
Right.
work,
Yeah. Yeah.
what you're seeing is this expression of this power. Is it supernatural? No, it's
Okay.
not supernatural.
It's interesting. Up to this point, we have been talking about just, Chinese, movies or movies based on that. But I see a connection with Star Wars films. George Lucas actually uses the word the Force. Let the Force be with you. And that is almost like, key. Okay?
He stole everything from the Taoist.
Well,
Let's just
we can say that.
straight out.
Yeah.
You repackaged.
But, let's connect it to our yoga system, because the Indian yoga system follows the metaphysical system, which comes out of a philosophy called Sankhya. And that gives us a metaphysical structure of reality. What's the nature of reality? What's the nature of a human being? The nature of a human being is this absolute consciousness, which we call Purusha. And our goal is to get to this Purusha, this infinite consciousness, which is, some people have called it as an infinite library of information residing inside you. And all of us have that. And Sankhya says that this is there. Then yoga, on the other hand, gives us a step-by-step procedure to get
there.
into that. And that step-by-step procedure we call contemplative practice or meditation and so forth. It helps us to tap that source and express it through our physical body, through our emotions, through our mental faculties. Now, some people have compared the Tao Te Ching of Lao-Tzu, which gives us an overall picture of reality. And they say that to practice that picture of reality, to tap the source, which Lao-Tzu says resides inside us as the day. The Tao is out there, but day is residing in each one of us. Tai Chi is the way to tap this source, so that my outside, the way I act, the way I feel, the way I think, all that is expressing the inner force.
Yes.
And are the Taoists talking about that?
Yes, they are. And so I think this is a correct description. And I think that you can say that Tai Chi or the Qigong, this is a way of tapping into this, arriving at oneness with this. I think in Taoism, as I think in the Indian traditions, historically in Taoism, there's some diversity here, where all Taoist masters practicing Qigong. Yes. Did they all, however, did some of them find maybe that that religious ritual or acting through a ritual was maybe better for them than Qigong? Well, the Taoist rituals, if you watch a Taoist master now, Taoist ritual is just Qigong.
Oh, okay.
Okay, it's Qigong. It's they may be using bells or candles or burning papers or something, but you can be sure that the movements of their bodies are, in principle, no different than a movement that we might sort of associate with yogic and Qigong kind of continuities and traditions. I think it's very important that we understand this.
You touched upon the Buddhist connection, that in Taoism there was some kind of meditative practice. But at a certain time in the history of China, Buddhism came into China. And then Buddhism brought with itself a special kind of Buddhist practice called dhyana, the meditative, which became later on jhana. And ultimately the blend of Buddhist meditative practice with the Taoist practice became what we later on call Zen, Zen Buddhism. And it traveled from China to Korea and then finally to Japan. Could you say something about that part?
Well, this, I think one of the most interesting things to me here is that how Taoism was prepared for Buddhism, you see? Now then, so we shouldn't think here in terms of were the Taoists originally, did they originally borrow from the Buddhists? But I think what we should maybe think about is, isn't it interesting that human beings in these different areas discover the same kinds of ways? Or not maybe the same sort of ways, but very similar parameters by which they can express their spiritual energy.
There's a special name for that, the axial age, or what do they call it?
Yeah, the axial age, and so and it's as though you find in the Taoist text, you find you must empty yourself, you must become still, and when you become still in the still water, the Tao is reflected, yes, but not in the messy water or the muddy or the so stillness, quietude, emptiness, these kinds of things are already in the Taoist tradition before Buddhism. So then when Buddhism came in, it made a good graft. Buddhism maybe won its foothold so easily into China because the Chinese sensibilities were already well prepared for this. this way of thinking. And then, of course, one stream, historically speaking, one stream of Taoism is called the Chuanjian stream, and this stream is still very active today.
Right.
And so if you think, well, sometimes your students and people who study Taoism will say, well, don't Taoists have monasteries? Don't they have nuns? Don't they have monks?
Yeah.
Yes. In the Chuanjian tradition, yes. And they are following this kind of Buddhist grafting, and it's out of that trunk that we have Chan and then Zen.
I want to come back to a point that we just kind of hit in passing, that it was many of the Taoists who developed things like gunpowder. And as you know, the Yoga and Meditation Society has as its express goal the interface between science, philosophy, and religion. Particularly the question is whether you can do a scientific study of spirituality. Clearly, there was a connection between what we might call technology and experiment that was going on with the Taoist masters, and yet there continues to be a debate as to whether the Chinese ever developed science. Would you say that the practice of inner alchemy is an experimental practice? Is it the case that what is done responds to positive or negative results based on what the expectations were, or is it just somehow tapping mysteriously into this inner light and being guided by the mysterious voice of George Lucas in Star Wars?
The Force. Yeah.
It's a difficult question. It's a complex question. I think that, and it goes deep into deep waters of Taoism, because I think what I would want to stress here is that inner alchemy was definitely assisted by diet. Yes. Okay, and so this is why for example, there's a Taoist text from the 2nd century BCE that already enumerates over 2,000 herbal medicines. The Taoists were into pharmacology.
Yes.
And pharmacology is related to gunpowder.
Of course.
Because it's related to the experimentation. It's what's medicinal eventually will extend into what else can I do that will assist. So meditation, my meditation might be aided by my diet. And where should my diet go? What kind of herbs and things that do I find here that practice that aid me in the inner way? So even though we divide between external and internal alchemy, we also have to recognize this too is a false distinction.
Right. And this goes very much back to the interconnectedness of all beings and all parts of our being.
And so I think that one cannot understand Taoist meditation and contemplative meditation ultimately unless one understands the Chinese physics that underwrites it. And the Chinese physics, which is a science, okay, even though we might, of course, disagree with the particularities of this science, that, you know, there's wood-type people and metal-type people. Of course we don't, we do not think that this is ultimately a, scientifically helpful vision. But there is much that we could learn about the process nature and continuum nature and the way in which energy moves that maybe is very relevant scientifically.
Yeah. Well, you've been talking about, the Taoists or even the people in yoga. They are really trying to look at a human being as a divided being. Yeah. There is an aspect of us, this aspect, which is arguing, which is discussing, which is raising all these questions. That is the agitated mind. That's the analytical mind.
Yes.
And in Hinduism, we call it the monkey mind, which is jumping from topic to topic. And if this makes me happy, let me explore the next one. That makes me unhappy. Let me go to the next. That's tasteless. So we jump around, and we create a great deal of stress and strain. So we are agitated people. That's why we say in our society we are stressed out. But that's just the outside. That's okay when you deal with the practical world. but then there is the inner essence, there is the inner being. In the Taoist philosophy, we call it the day. In yoga philosophy, we call it Atman or Purusha. And that is the infinite source of stillness, calmness, silence. So when the Taoists or the yoga philosophers are talking about meditative practice, the goal is to some other work on this agitated mind, to put this monkey mind to a stop, okay? So that your inner being, that silence, that contentment, that supernal peace which resides inside you, dishes itself out, flourishes, can express itself in all different forms of creativity, whether it's poetry, it's music, it's dealing with your family, dealing with friends, dealing with other nations. So maybe you have something to tell us about that. So what will be your message for today, which you want to give to us, to our Yoga Society and our listeners?
You know, there's an interesting passage in Zhuangzi where the discursive mind is compared to a monkey, and I just thought of that while you were mentioning it. But imagine a rod, and it's red hot on one end. Let's say, imagine it as liquid, okay? And it comes out and it gets colder and colder, okay, and dark and then, okay. So the more you move this way in Taoist thought, the more you move to the discursive mind. And so, but is it the same rod as the white hot liquid? Yes, it's the same thing. It's not as though there's a soul and a body, okay? And so what you want to do is, you don't want everything to get cold.
Right. Okay.
And the discursive mind to dominate, because it will kill it will harden, okay? So, but what you want to do is get the heat going this way. This is the transformation that comes. So what you want is, you want the chi inside, the spirit inside, the the virtue, the way in which Tao virtues and brings this quietness and peace and this. You want it to heat up everything else, and so it's cognitive. There in a Taoist meditation or in a Taoist experience with the dynamic of chi, you know something. You know truth. You know goodness. And you know it with a clarity and a heat and a vividness that you don't know out on the cold edges of discursion. And so this is why transformation is what's important, because what you're trying to do is not get rid of an old shell that is a body so your soul can go somewhere. What you're trying to do in Taoism is change yourself.
So that's what actually comes down to what Deepak Chopra calls the ageless body and timeless mind.
Exactly.
And that's what meditative practice tries to offer us, whether it's in Taoism, whether it's in Buddhism, or whether it's in yoga. And I'm very happy that you're able to form this connection. I thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me.
For being our guest.
Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Schrader.
Thank you, Ashok.
And thank
Our
you.
pleasure.